The Magic Loop Knitting Method. Hi everyone, my name is Norman. I run the blog nimbleneedles.com and today's video is all about how to knit magic loop and use a single circular needle to knit in the round. This video has been requested for quite some time because a lot of people seem to struggle with double-pointed needles. And I'm very happy I can finally show you this ingenious and super simple method. It was first mentioned by Sarah Hauschka around 2002 and it's now a main staple in every experienced knitter's toolbox. First, I will show you the basic magic loop technique. And in the second part, it's all about tips and tricks. You know, how to avoid ladders here around the gaps and get neater results. There is so much misinformation floating around the internet, so I thought it was about time to demystify the problem and provide you with hands-on solutions that really work. Anyway, let's dive right into it and show you how to knit magic loop. But before, please like this video right now to support my work, and also make sure to comment if there are any other problems you have been knitting in the round you want me to address, or you just want to thank me for this video. To start, you will need circular knitting needles with a sufficiently long cable. 36 to 40 inches or 90 to 100 centimeters is a good place to start. But the bigger your project, the longer the cables need to be. I am using these Knitter's Pride interchangeable knitting needles here, and I attached a different tip to either side so you can follow me along more easily, but of course you can use the same tips on either side. First, you need to join your knitting in the round. My last video was all about it. I'll link it to you up in here, but we'll repeat things quickly. So start with a simple backward loop here around your needles and then cast on the required number of stitches using a standard longtail cast on, and then cast on one additional stitch. So in this case I cast on 21 stitches instead of just 20. And now that I cast on the required number of stitches, I slide all my stitches here to the middle of my cable. And now I fold the cast on edge like this and pull out the cable here in the middle. And now you need to slide these stitches back to the needles here in front and make sure that you don't let go of either the needles or the cable. It's because otherwise you risk twisting your cast on edge, and that is not what you want. So keep them firmly in your hand and slide your stitches all the way to the tip of your needles. And now you need to join in the round, and you can do this either using your fingers or your or a spare needle. And what you need to do is you need to slip this stitch to the back needle and you need to bring it all the way around. And now you can do this with your fingers as well, but then you won't see what I'm doing. And now you need to pass this new second stitch here over the first one and tighten things up by pulling on the tails. There you go. You joined your knitting in the round, and now it's time to start with the actual magic loop technique. From here, turn your needles around 180 degrees so the tips point towards the right. And now carefully pull out the front needle. Secure the stitches here with the other hand and carefully pull out the front needle. Keep a sizable loop here at the end, but the cable here in front needs to be long enough so you can move your needle around freely. This will be your working needle, and it will always stay your working needle throughout the project. On a little side note, to make things easier to knit, you could use a needle tip one size smaller on this side. Anyway, pick up your working yarn from here It should flow freely here in the back and not be trapped within the loop. And now it's time to knit the first stitch. Pinch these stitches together a bit so you don't end up with a big gap. And simply knit the first stitch. And then knit across the whole needle. So according to your pattern, no big secret here, just plain old knitting. And once you finish knitting across all stitches, you should have one free needle again. So what you need to do is, you need to carefully pull on the loop here to pull back, a lot of clinking here, pull back those stitches back to the needle. And now turn your needles by 180 degrees again. I'm gonna pull out the cast on tail here. And now pull out that needle again. So always the silver needle. Again, keep a nice loop here and enough cable so you can knit freely. And then knit across the second set of stitches again. Again, keep those stitches very close to each other so you don't create a big gap. And then knit across this second set of stitches. So now we finish the first round. You have one free needle again. So pull on the cable. It's always gonna be the same. Pull on the cable. Slide those stitches back to the cable. Turn around. And pull out your working needle again. And then knit across the second row. And quite frankly, that's already the whole secret to knitting Magic Loop. Once you've finished knitting across one needle, pull in the free needle, turn things around, and remove your working needle. It's that simple, really. One quick note here before we move on to the next section. If you notice that your cable isn't long enough and the loop here at the end of your project is really small, or there is barely enough length left to move your cable or your needle around freely, your working needle, then I recommend starting all over again using a longer circular needle. This is actually quite important because otherwise it will constrict your movements and this will ultimately lead to less than perfect results. So let's talk about some Magic Loop tips and tricks next. The probably biggest issue are ladders. When you don't pay attention, your tubular object won't look like this, seamless, but you will end up with a column of rather loose knit stitches here along the gaps, and that's probably not what you want. And it's very important to understand that there are two fundamentally different reasons for ladders. First, as you knit across these gaps, you add too much yarn. And the second reason, due to the way you handle your knitting needles, cables, and the way you tension your yarn, you redistribute yarn, resulting in uneven stitches. Let's take a look. So my first tip is a repetition of what I already showed you. As you knit the very first stitch, keep that last stitch here very, very close to that stitch as you knit it. Because if you don't, if you knit like that or so, you will add a considerable length of yarn here in the middle to bridge that gap. and that extra length is there to stay. And if you do it in every row, you will create ladders. So keep that stitch really close as you knit the first stitches. A somewhat similar effect can happen if you purl the first stitch on a needle. Now, I have repeatedly heard that that's because a purl stitch would need more yarn than a knit stitch. And I've read this in knitting books, and I've even heard it from a couple of knitting professionals. And I would like to contest that opinion. I could knit the exact same pattern here by purling across all stitches and later on turning things inside out, and I promise you it would not have looked differently. A knit stitch is a mirror inverted purl stitch, and it does not need more yarn, period. Otherwise, knitting the way we know it wouldn't work. The difference has to do with the way yarn travels. Have you ever seen the Olympics? And when there are the 800-meter finals, all contestants will start here, and then they will switch to the first lane as it's closest to the curve. So it's much longer to run here around the outer lane than here in the center. And the very same principle applies to knitting in the round, because if you keep the yarn in front, meaning on the outside, so the outer lane, the yarn has to travel much farther than if it stays here on the inside. And this will exaggerate any other problems you might have with lettering. So if possible, try to avoid purl stitches as the first stitch on a needle. Instead, shuffle stitches around. And if your pattern is purl stitches all over, you can simply invert your pattern and purl on the inside. See, I can knit the magic loop like this as well. So the yarn is in the back for my knit stitch, but it's on the outside. And if I purl like this, the yarn is in front just as well, but it's on the inside, meaning it can take that very first lane. But what if you keep things close and bridge the gaps like a pro, but you still end up with ladders? Well, we need to talk about tension. So all the stitches in a row are connected. So when you knit that very first stitch and then you pull tight, what will happen is that you can also close this previous stitch here, because it's no longer secured by the barrel of your knitting needle, so you can easily close it by pulling on the working yarn. So as a general rule, I would not pull the first stitch tight at all. Just bring the cable close and knit across as normal. And then when you knit the second stitch, you may give your working yarn a gentle tug, because now you can no longer affect this stitch here on the cable, but you may prevent this stitch here from becoming too loose. Now, it's very important to note that this will largely depend on whether you are a tight knitter or a loose knitter. Sometimes tight knitters may have to consciously knit those first stitches on the needles a bit looser to avoid ladders, because as I said, most of them are caused by a tension imbalance and not by the gaps in and by itself. A very similar thing may happen here at the very end of your needles. Here, when you knit this last stitch, a lot of people use the loops on the left needle to gain a bit of leverage to knit that stitch. And what will happen is you pull out that very last stitch, and of course this will steal yarn from the adjacent stitches. Instead, try to knit those last stitches as carefully as possible, so the full weight of your work doesn't rest on that last stitch as you knit it. Try to keep the back close to it as well. What can also happen, and that's mainly a problem when your cables are too short. Here at the very end, the tension of your cable may spread your stitches out too much, and this will steal yarn from the stitches to the left and right, and it will give it to this bar here in between. And this of course can also result in a ladder. So again, this will only affect stitches that you have previously knitted and you have no influence over in your current row. So, and it's very easy to fix if you have a long enough cable. There won't be any extra stress on that gap. And the last common issue is knitting complicated stitches here at the end or the beginning of a needle. So when you knit an SSK or a purl together through the back loop or whatever, or other decreases and increases, you frequently use the loops as a sort of leverage. But when you do this before or after a gap, the stitch will be able to steal much more yarn here from the gap. Because no matter what you do, these gaps, I mean, they exist and they stretch out the stitches left and right a bit. And when you knit an SSK or a knit two together here, it will steal much more yarn and it will result in a looser decrease or increase. And this too can result in little eyelets or even ladders. So if you notice that your SSKs or whatever are lining up here on the edge, you can always pull your cable all the way through and then pull it out in a different position. And this method even has its own name. It's called traveling magic loop. Typically people do this here at the beginning of the row when they change needles. So instead of pulling the needle out like this, you would pull out a loop here, pull out a loop here, and then continue knitting. And this will move the beginning of your row, or rather the gap, by a couple or 3 stitches in this case, with every row or with every turn of the needles. And this method will help anyone who has problems with the first stitch, as the last 3 or 4 stitches are no longer on the cable but on the needle. So it's a very viable technique. And just to show this one more time, so once you finish knitting across that row, you pull back your free needle, and again you pull out that needle, but you don't pull it out all the way. Instead, you pull out your loop here, and then you start knitting across the next set of stitches. And because the loop constantly travels around, it's called traveling magic loop, I guess. Right here at the very end, I want to talk about a topic that is very dear to my heart. In and by itself, magic loop is not better or worse than knitting with double-pointed knitting needles. It's also not easier or more difficult. If you look around, you will find as many people loving double-pointed knitting needles as there are fans of circular needles. There are even those who enjoy using these ChiaoGoo mini needles to knit their socks. I recommend trying it out all and see what works for you and what doesn't. I'll link you my tutorial on how I knit in the round on double-pointed needles up in here. But at no point do I want you to feel compelled to making the switch. I personally rarely knit using magic loop. I find it a bit too cumbersome and slow, and I pretty much prefer double-pointed knitting needles. Still, it's a very useful technique to have in your toolbox. For example, when I knit Fair Isle or stranded colorwork, I will do it using magic loop, because the fewer gaps there are, the easier it is to handle all those floats. And also, if for whatever reason you find knitting in the round is too difficult for you, no matter the technique, then that's fine as well. Maybe you are not at that point in your knitting journey yet. Keep the method in mind and revisit it later on. Until then, you can look into joining larger flat projects in the round with mattress stitch in a super invisible way. At the end of the day, magic loop is a technique for intermediate knitters, and there is no shame in having difficulties with it yet. Above all, no matter if it's double-pointed knitting needles or circular needles, you will have to give it a bit of time. It's a whole new skill, and your mind and your muscles will need a bit of time to get used to it. Just like you needed some time when you knitted your first pot holder. Most of us weren't born with knitting needles in their hands, but that doesn't mean we cannot learn given enough patience and practice. Anyway, that's the Magic Loop knitting method. Please like this video if you enjoyed watching, comment with your feedback and your questions, and don't forget to subscribe in case you don't want to miss any new videos. Happy knitting and enjoy the rest of your day.